They see it now. The weight of it is finally pressing down on them. The truth they tried to avoid, the consequences they once denied, the silence you left behind, the absence of your presence, your kindness, your loyalty. It's deafening to them now, and it should be, because they had something rare, something irreplaceable, and they destroyed it. They didn't realize what they had when they had you. That's the great tragedy, isn't it? People often don't understand the value of a person until that person is gone, truly gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, permanently. You were the lighthouse in their storm, the one who stayed when others fled, the one who believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves. And what did they do? They betrayed that. They mocked it. They took it for granted. They treated your devotion like a convenience, your patience like a weakness, and your love like it was disposable. But now they see it. They see the crater left in their lives. They see the echo of your absence ripple through the very foundations they once stood on. And it's terrifying to them, because what they destroyed wasn't just a relationship. It was a lifeline. It was something sacred built on honesty, compassion, and resilience. And you, despite all the pain, were willing to carry that weight until they made it unbearable. You tried. You really did. You put your heart on the line. You gave them your best even when they gave you their worst. That's not weakness. That's strength beyond comprehension. To show up every day for someone who couldn't see your worth. That takes courage. That takes a spirit forged in fire. And now, as they sit in the wreckage of their own making, they realize what they lost wasn't just a person. It was the mirror of who they could have been if they had risen to meet you with the same integrity. You were the opportunity for them to grow, to become better, to be redeemed by love and guided by truth. And instead they chose pride. They chose lies. They chose destruction over healing. And now that the dust has settled, they're left with nothing but memories. Memories of what could have been if only they'd chosen differently. There's a strange justice in that. Not revenge, because that's not what this is. You don't need revenge. Reality delivers that better than you ever could. What you need is distance, clarity, and growth. And you've done that. You've rebuilt from the ashes. You've faced the darkness, not just theirs, but your own, and emerged not bitter, but better. Stronger, wiser, unshakable. And that, ironically, is what haunts them most. They thought you'd crumble. They thought you'd chase them, beg them, plead for their attention. But you didn't. You held your ground. You stared into the void they created and said, I won't live in your chaos anymore. That level of composure, of self-respect, it's terrifying to those who only understand control through manipulation. You broke the cycle. You became the example they never expected you to be, and now they watch from a distance. They scroll through your life like a ghost looking through a window they're not welcome at anymore. They see the light returning to your eyes, the confidence in your step, the purpose in your path, and they realize they were never the reason for your strength. They were merely the catalyst that awoke it. You don't need their apology. You don't need their validation, because what they destroyed was their chance to stand beside someone truly rare. You were the real deal in a world full of masks. You showed up when it was hard. You stayed when it was uncomfortable. You gave when you had nothing left. And all they had to do was see you. But they were blind with arrogance, deafened by ego. And now they have to live with that truth. You're not the same person anymore. You've changed, not because of them, but because of what you had to become to survive their betrayal. You learned that peace isn't found in pleasing others. It's found in protecting your soul. And now you guard it with the strength of someone who knows what it's like to be shattered and rebuilt from scratch. There's a certain elegance in letting people live with what they've done, in allowing time to expose truth without needing to scream it. You've said everything you needed to say through your silence, through your growth, through the life you're building now. And they're haunted not by your words, but by your absence, because the one who loved them the most is gone. Not out of hatred, but out of necessity. They see now what they destroyed, but it's too late, and it should be. Let them feel the gravity of that loss. Let them lie awake in the silence where your laughter used to be. Let them replay every moment, every word, every chance they threw away. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. And it's fair, because in the end, you rose not by dragging them down, but by lifting yourself up. And that's something they'll never unsee. They didn't notice it at first. People rarely do. When someone genuine is always there, steady, kind, dependable, it becomes easy to forget the depth of what they bring. You were there consistently through the highs and lows, in moments of chaos and calm. You listened when no one else cared, supported them when they didn't deserve it, gave them your patience, your presence, your heart, and they got used to it. That's the tragedy. They didn't recognize your worth because you made it look effortless. You didn't ask for much, just honesty, respect, maybe the simple decency of being seen and appreciated for who you really were, but they couldn't even give you that. They were too preoccupied with themselves, too blinded by their own ego to realize the treasure that stood right in front of them. It's a story as old as time. People don't value what they can't immediately measure. And so, because you didn't shout, because you didn't demand, they assumed your worth was small. But what they missed was that your quietness wasn't weakness. It was restraint. It was grace. You held the line when everything around them was falling apart. You gave without expectation. You loved without condition. You forgave over and over again, and that became the problem. They mistook your endurance for unlimited tolerance. They mistook your softness for submission. They thought you'd always be there no matter how they treated you. And for a while, maybe you were. But people forget that even the strongest bridges collapse when walked over too many times. And when you finally made the choice, when you decisively stepped away and declared, "Enough is enough," it wasn't a shout that followed. It was silence. And that quiet departure hit them harder than any word you could have possibly uttered. That's when the awareness began to set in. Not like a lightning strike, but slowly, day by draining day, they started tracking your absence. It's the echo of your non-presence in every corner of their existence. They didn't just lose a caring person. They lost stability. They lost the wellspring of compassion. They lost the one individual who genuinely saw them, their deepest faults, their hidden wounds, their untapped potential, and kept choosing to stay until you simply could not remain. Now that you are definitively gone, that space is starting to ache. They feel the way your presence used to naturally soothe the atmosphere around them. They register the warmth that used to be embedded in your words. They recognize the meaning you infused into moments they previously took for granted. There is no substitute for that kind of authenticity. You cannot mask deep-seated regret with constant distraction. You can't drown out the realization of loss forever. Eventually, the quiet becomes suffocating. It's the kind of silence that screams louder than any confrontation. And it serves as a daily, brutal reminder of exactly what they broke. It seeps in when the background noise fades, when they reflexively reach for their phone, only to find no message from you, when they instinctively seek connection and realize there is no one on the receiving end. That's the true impact, not in the heat of the drama, but in the chilling stillness afterward. They start recalling the small things, the soft smile you gave them when they deserved criticism, the unwavering belief you held when they gave you 1,000 reasons to stop. They remember you stayed when things got tough, and they were so convinced you were a permanent fixture. But you left, and that's what fundamentally shakes them, because what they discarded was truly rare. Individuals who give from the core of their being, who shoulder the burdens of others when they themselves are weak, these are the people who forge legacies. And they carelessly, thoughtlessly toss that connection away, acting as if someone like you could be found on the next street corner. The stark reality is, they will search for you in every new face and never find you. What you offered was unique. It was sacred. And accepting that fact is an enormous weight to bear. Not because they were unaware deep down, but because they actively refused to acknowledge it while they had the chance. They dismissed the internal warnings. They quieted their conscience. They kept telling themselves you'd never depart because that narrative was easier for them to live with. Now they only have memories and a cold hollowness where your presence anchored them. This is the ultimate consequence in life. It requires no external punishment. The outcome simply is, you didn't need to lash out or justify your exit. Your absence articulated everything. The emptiness they experience now wasn't something you inflicted. It's the direct result of their choices. Every moment they dismissed you, every critical word they withheld, every chance they had to elevate themselves and chose not to, that's what truly haunts their private hours. The most resilient people often leave the quietest farewells because they owe no justification for protecting themselves. They gave everything they had. When they depart, their absence functions as a mirror. It shows the other person exactly who they were within that relationship, not through accusation, but through undeniable clarity. And that revelation is devastating. They don't miss you because they suddenly became better people. They miss you because they finally see what they sacrificed. They finally understand they possessed something extraordinary, and they dismantled it, not in one grand failure, but through hundreds of tiny selfish decisions. To be dishonest. To be careless. Each small act was a cut until the bond essentially bled out. But you You moved forward. You healed. Not because the path was easy, but because staying broken was not an option. You understood that your value didn't shrink simply because someone else failed to recognize it. Your growth is your quiet victory, achieved for yourself. You survived what was meant to crush you. You became stronger through abandonment. You learned that self-love surpasses the need to be validated by people who never truly tried to understand you. They see you now. They see the results of your survival. Not because you returned to them, but because your departure finally illuminated everything they spent so long refusing to look at. And that insight is the burden they must carry. Not because you wish it upon them, but because that is what truth does. It waits patiently, it lingers, and when the distractions finally quiet down, it whispers the truth they fought so hard to ignore. You were the best opportunity they were given, and they deliberately destroyed it. Let them sit with that knowledge. You do not need to utter another syllable. You weren't merely an element of their life. You were a direct challenge to everything dysfunctional within them. You were a mirror, specifically the kind that reveals both a person's highest potential and their most profound inadequacies. You demonstrated what they could achieve if they were just brave enough to rise up and confront the internal darkness. Instead of choosing the hard path of growth, they chose destruction. Instead of meeting your honesty, love, and consistency, they retreated into fear and ego. This is what happens when people are simply not ready. They tear down the thing that forces them to see their own shortcomings. They destroy the connection that threatens to expose their unresolved pain. You didn't cause them pain by being harsh. You caused it by being genuine. You brought light into the hidden corners of their lives. And instead of accepting the gift of that clarity, instead of being humbled by the chance to become better, they retaliated, because true change requires immense courage. It was easier for them to break the reflection than to look into it. You were remarkably patient with their chaos, exceptionally generous with their failures, and for a time, they convinced themselves they could remain small, dishonest, and guarded, and you would simply stay by their side, that you would lower your standards to suit their dysfunction. But connection built on love is not about comfort, it's about mutual evolution. While you were ready to grow alongside them, they were terrified of the demands that evolution placed upon them: accountability, vulnerability, and maturity. You never asked for perfection. You certainly didn't demand flawless behavior. You only required effort. You needed truth. You needed a partner willing to meet you halfway. But that was too much to ask, because in their isolated view, stepping up meant admitting that the persona they clung to was fundamentally flawed. It meant owning their pain. And rather than embracing responsibility, they projected that pain outward, casting blame onto you. That is the core tragedy. You gave them a chance to be honorable. You offered them the incredible gift of being fully seen, without constant judgment. You saw their potential and their fear, and you remained present. But many people cannot withstand being loved that clearly, that deeply, because when someone sees you so thoroughly, when they believe in your capacity to improve more than you do, it becomes intolerable if you aren't prepared to meet that standard. So they dismantled it. Not suddenly, but incrementally. With every dishonesty, every broken promise, every instance where they chose silence over dialogue, anger over vulnerability, they eroded the very foundation you were attempting to build. Now they stand in the wreckage, confused about how it collapsed. But deep inside, they know the truth. They destroyed something sacred, not because it was inherently fragile, but because they were careless. They fundamentally treated your deep connection as a liability. They viewed your inherent strength as a threat because your very being demanded that they elevate themselves, and they were simply not ready for that change. They didn't want to confront the aspects of themselves they had buried. They didn't want the humility of admitting they were the source of the issues. So instead, they made you the problem. They tried to label you as too intense, too emotional, too demanding, when the simple truth is, you were merely awake. You were conscious. And they could not tolerate standing in the pure light of that awareness. It is always easier to sabotage something genuine than to commit to the growth required to sustain it. They chose the path of least resistance. Whether they walked away or forced your departure, the outcome is the same. They destroyed something that held the power to raise them up. Now that realization is finally starting to penetrate. Time is the great neutralizer. It inevitably strips away all excuses. Life has a way of showing us the magnitude of what we overlooked when we were too arrogant to appreciate it. They now sit with the clarity that you were the opportunity, you were the chance. You were the one who didn't condemn them for their past, but believed deeply in their future potential. You weren't simply trying to love them. You were offering to build a shared life rooted in truth, something people spend their entire existence searching for. But you cannot compel anyone to grow. You cannot drag a person toward their higher self. They must make that choice willingly. And they didn't. They chose to cling to their familiar brokenness. They prioritized comfort over genuine growth, familiarity over necessary transformation. By doing so, they consciously eliminated the one thing that was constantly calling them to rise. You were not too much for them. You were just too real for the fractured version of themselves they insisted on clutching, and now they see it. They understand the scale of their loss, not only the absence of you, but the absence of the person they could have become while walking alongside you. They realize your presence in their life was not random. It felt like a divine alignment, a moment of profound significance, and they disregarded it. That level of regret is a permanent fixture, because they know they didn't just reject your affection. They rejected a future that was better, yes, but also unfamiliar, vulnerable, and demanding of their commitment. That door is now shut, not out of bitterness or animosity, but because you finally understood that you cannot indefinitely carry someone who is determined to stay mired in stagnation. And you have thrived. You have stepped powerfully into your own light. You have become everything you were attempting to build with them, now achieving it without them. That is the ultimate poetic justice. That is the truth they must now confront. In rejecting you, they ultimately rejected their own personal evolution. There is no simple path back to that lost moment. All they possess now is the painful, constant knowledge that the person who offered them everything they genuinely needed was the one they carelessly destroyed. Your intention was never their destruction. You simply departed quietly, calmly, with profound dignity. There reaches a point when a soul must stop bleeding itself dry for individuals who repeatedly hand it the knife. You left purely out of necessity. You made the conscious choice for peace, for growth, for self-healing. And it is that unwavering choice, your refusal to be trapped in their persistent chaos, that now reverberates through their world like thunder in a silent chamber. You didn't exit with drama. You didn't seek external revenge, which they could have easily dismissed. Instead, you accomplished something far more potent. You got better. You healed. You elevated your standard. You cultivated a self that no longer tolerates disrespect, manipulation, or emotional immaturity. This profound evolution is what now haunts their thoughts. They anticipated your collapse. They expected you to fall apart without their approval. People who rely on control cannot fathom anyone achieving strength without their external validation. They mistakenly assumed they were your anchor. They were wrong. Your strength did not originate from them. It came from the experience of surviving them, from enduring the confusion, the disappointment, the betrayal, and refusing to let it turn your spirit bitter. Your growth now functions as a powerful mirror, reflecting back every excuse and selfish act they refused to face when you were present. They thought they were winning by diminishing you. That narrative is now completely inverted because they see the truth. You did not fall. You rose, and your rising irrevocably exposes their fall. This is an undeniable principle. The most significant consequence is not external punishment. It is the internal reckoning. That is what they live with now, not the physical absence, but the absence of your energy, your capacity for forgiveness, your encouragement, your spirit. They feel the coldness where warmth once resided, the silence where laughter echoed, the fortified wall where once there was an open heart, and nothing can fill that space. They try to distract, they try to move on, but it is a temporary fix because they are constantly pursuing a ghost. They search for you in people who lack the ability to carry what you carried, who haven't lived your story, who can't love with your distinctive depth. And they always come up empty because what they lost was not just a person. It was a force, a soul that gifted them the essential space to heal, to grow, to truly become. And they squandered it as if it were worthless. But your current state, your healing, is what truly haunts them. Because you are no longer the wounded person they discarded. That version of you is gone. In her place stands someone unbothered, someone wiser, someone who has tasted freedom and will never again accept emotional crumbs. And this transformation is terrifying to them. It reveals a devastating truth about them. The person they tried to break only emerged stronger. It confirms they were wrong about you, about themselves, and about the repercussions of their actions. They dramatically underestimated your inherent capacity to rise from the very ashes they attempted to create. Now, every time they witness your success, every glimpse of the powerful confidence they tried to stifle, it shatters the convenient illusion they constructed to protect their ego. They convinced themselves you are naive, replaceable, or weak. But time is a ruthless exposer of lies. Weakness does not lead to this kind of transformation. Replaceable things do not leave such permanent, agonizing shadows. They are finally beginning to grasp that the suffering they caused you was a weapon that backfired. You took it. You shaped it. You built your new life upon it. The fire they ignited within you did not consume you. It refined you. Like gold in the crucible, you emerged more resilient, more focused, more profoundly determined than you have ever been. That depth of healing cannot be faked or read in a self-help book. It is earned through solitude, through the agonizing quiet nights where you taught yourself to comfort yourself in the absence of the very person who betrayed you. And that level of healing emits a frequency they can still sense. It lingers in their thoughts, in their quiet moments, and in the look in your eyes if your paths ever truly intersect again, a look that simply acknowledges, I remember everything, and I have moved beyond it. That is what cuts the deepest. The fact that you didn't return to prove a point. You didn't demand an apology. You didn't participate in their continuing games. You outgrew them entirely. And that act of outgrowing is a message that requires no words, no drama. It came with the quiet, undeniable force of evolution. There is no sense of closure in watching someone you discarded walk away and thrive without you. There is only reckoning, and that is their current reality. They are now facing the inescapable truth that your growth is a constant, shimmering reminder of their stagnation. Your hard-won freedom exposes their self-imposed prison. Your rediscovered self-worth reveals the profound extent of their self-deception. This is the ultimate victory of truth. It wins quietly, with the passage of time, with grace, and with the simple, undeniable evidence that you never required revenge. You simply needed to rise. And rise you did. Now you are your own closure, your own justice, your own inner peace. And they are left haunted, not by your fury, but by your absence. Not by any hatred you might hold, but by the sheer force of your strength. Not by what you spoke, but by the remarkable person you became after they forfeited the right to keep you. And that, more than anything else, is the unbearable pain they never anticipated feeling. There is no force more haunting than a silent realization. No punishment more piercing than being left entirely alone with a truth you cannot escape. Especially when that truth is this. They deliberately destroyed the very thing they now desperately crave but can never reclaim. At first, they were blind to it. Their pride stood rigidly, inflated by their self-serving illusions of control. They were convinced your departure was temporary and your value was easily replaceable. But pride is short-sighted. Reality is not. Now they see it, not just theoretically, but viscerally. They feel it in the oppressive silence, in the chilling emptiness, in the definitive absence of your voice, your insight, your warmth. They feel it in the echoing consequences of their own choices, consequences they believed they were exempt from. Because individuals like that often believe they can dismiss, discard, or belittle others, and then move on without a lasting cost. But the price is always collected. Not immediately, not with a dramatic flourish, but subtly, steadily, like an inevitable storm gathering on the horizon of their soul. It surfaces now in the small, quiet moments. The songs that abruptly remind them of a time when their life held coherence. The shared places that have suddenly become lifeless. The laughter that no longer sounds authentic. The empty message thread, the unreturned call. The final chilling realization that your number is permanently gone from the other end of the line. They begin to notice these fractures gradually until they are ubiquitous. Until the crushing weight of their irreversible loss becomes impossible to ignore. They remember how you listened, not just with your ears, but with your entire heart. How you stood by them when they offered nothing but weak excuses and shattered promises. How you poured your entire energy into their needs even when your own reserves were depleted. How you maintained belief in them when they couldn't see past their own pain. And most tragically, they realize how they fundamentally mistook your fierce loyalty for weakness, your immense patience for naivete, and your profound kindness as something disposable. But it wasn't. You weren't. That realization now chokes them. because there is a distinct form of torment in knowing that you were the safe harbor they willfully chose to set on fire. That while you were committed to building, they were relentlessly tearing down. That while you fought for their well-being, they were actively fighting against you. And what makes it worse? It was never actually about a flaw in your worth. It was entirely about their own unresolved wounds, their fear, and their refusal to confront the inadequacies you unwittingly exposed. Now, with your protective presence gone, they are left with no one to shield them from the painful reflection of themselves. They might have tried to move on, thinking they could substitute your genuine energy with superficial connections, with convenient distractions that demand nothing and expose nothing. But all they achieved was a delay of the inevitable reckoning, because nothing and no one has the capacity to match the depth of soul you brought to their existence. Nothing feels like home anymore. Everything else is a diluted imitation of what they systematically destroyed. And that is the torment. They destroyed it. Not fate, not bad luck. Their choices, their actions, their words. And no amount of time, regret, or a hastily offered apology can ever undo that reality. You are no longer the same person they abandoned. You are now sharper, stronger, softer in the ways that allow connection, and harder in the ways that establish and protect your boundaries. You now carry boundaries that absolutely will not bend for the sake of familiarity or nostalgia. And that boundary is the doorway they cannot re-enter, because it's not merely locked. The bridge has been utterly destroyed. They now stand on the far side of a chasm, perpetually staring at a life that could have been theirs. A potential future where they might have grown alongside you. A path that demanded humility and self-awareness, traits they were too proud to cultivate. And now they understand. They know deep down that no one else will love them with your intensity and intention, not because you were without fault, but because you loved from the depths of your being. You didn't love them to fix them. You loved them precisely as they were, even when that acceptance cost you dearly. That caliber of love simply does not reappear twice. This is the non-negotiable price of betrayal. Not always the wrath of the one you hurt, but the relentless internal erosion that begins when they realize they casually traded gold for gravel. They discarded something sacred, not because it was inherently wrong, but because it required them to grow up, show up, and live honestly. Having tasted the bitter consequences, they look back now, not with pride, but with deep shame, not with peace, but with lasting internal torment. They observe the person you have become. They notice how you glow differently now, how your energy has fundamentally shifted, how your self-assured silence speaks volumes more than your old words ever could. And they know instinctively that they were the unintentional villain in a story they were too emotionally immature to grasp. They were not merely a mistake you made. They were the lesson you survived. And that undeniable, irreversible truth follows them everywhere they go. There is no shortcut through that specific type of guilt. No simple remedy, because while you were actively healing, they were retreating into denial. While you were confronting the pain, they were escaping responsibility. And now, every truth they buried comes crashing back with brutal, blinding clarity. They didn't just lose you. They lost the best version of themselves that only existed because of your influence. And they will never get that potential back. And here you are, quiet, unbothered, perhaps even smiling. Not out of malice, but because you finally fully recognize your own inherent worth. Because you finally ceased pouring your life energy into people who only knew how to watch you suffer. Because you understand now that your absence is the loudest, most powerful truth you will ever speak. And that truth, for them, rings piercingly in their ears every single day.